They say the moment you hit rock bottom is also when you discover the true nature of those you thought always loved you. I found that out the day my own biological father kicked me out of our $8 million mansion, just because I refused to become his clone. Instead of a hug or a congratulatory word, he threw a thin wad of cash in my face and coldly said something I'll never forget. "You're worth this much, Lily. A useless brat like you is lucky if you end up changing light bulbs for other people." I had just turned 23, freshly graduated with honors in energy engineering from UC Berkeley, but my father didn't care. He hadn't even bothered showing up to my graduation ceremony, claiming he had a meeting with the company's senior stakeholders. My mother wasn't there either. She always stayed silent and sided with him, like a smiling shadow, swirling her martini while avoiding my eyes. I stood in the grand foyer flooded with golden chandelier light and cold white marble beneath my feet, gripping the handle of my old suitcase, the only thing I still had from college. Behind my father, the giant portrait of my grandfather stared down with stern eyes and a condescending look, as if judging me from the afterlife. My father, Henry Langston, was the CEO of Langston Financial Group, a family-run financial empire spanning 4 generations. In his eyes, the only worthy career for a child was joining the company, learning how to manipulate markets and sniff out billion-dollar deals. But I was different. I wanted to create real value, not just count other people's money. I wanted to research and develop sustainable energy storage systems. A field he called wishful thinking that'll never earn a dime. "An engineer? You mean willingly live like a plumber?" he sneered when I spoke of my dream. I remember clearly the moment he stood up from his expensive leather armchair, reached into his wallet and pulled out a $50 bill and a few crisp $20 bills. He threw them on the floor, right where I had stood moments earlier taking graduation photos with my mom, still holding onto a fragile hope that my family might be proud. "Take it. That's all you're worth." I stared at the bills scattered on the cold marble floor, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. It wasn't the small amount of money. It was the statement, sharp like a blade, straight to my pride. My mother stood by the staircase, turning away like the scene unfolding was a dull commercial she'd seen 1,000 times. I bent down and picked up the money. My fingers trembled. Not from fear, but because I knew I'd never come back to this place again. "I don't need your permission to succeed," I said. My eyes locked on his. He waved me off like shooing away a beggar. "Get out, and don't you dare use the Langston name to get a job or build anything. No one's opening doors for you without my name behind it." I walked out through the heavy oak doors with nothing but my one suitcase, an engineering degree in my bag, and exactly $110 in my wallet. The entirety of what I had after 4 years of college. The tall black iron gates slammed shut behind me with a screeching groan, like a final sentence pronounced. I had no home. The student apartment I lived in had been vacated. No car. The sedan I used to drive was under my father's name. No savings account either. It had been pulled the moment I declared I wouldn't join Langston Financial. I walked down the street like a stranger in a city that used to be home. But I carried something they would never understand. An idea, a determination, and a pain I would never forget. I left home in humiliation and disgrace, but they would remember the name they once disowned. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd make sure they couldn't ignore the true worth of the person they once called worthless. I don't remember how long I slept during the nearly 10-hour bus ride from Denver to San Jose. I just know that when I opened my eyes, I felt like a stranger among the rush of people, neon lights, and tech billboards of Silicon Valley. It was drizzling, and the cold soaked through my thin hoodie, making me shiver. I checked my wallet. Just $80 left after buying the ticket. And grabbing a sandwich on the way. I had nowhere to go. No friends, no relatives, no one waiting for me in this place. Except a fragile hope that the idea I had nurtured for the past 4 years might have a chance to survive in the so-called cradle of big dreamers. At night, I slept in a park near El Camino Real, curled up on a cold bench. My laptop was in my backpack, pressed tightly against my chest like the only valuable thing I had left. Every unfamiliar sound startled me. I was terrified someone would steal the hard drive containing my energy storage system design, the one I'd spent my entire senior year working on. The next morning, I dragged myself into a small coffee shop called Willow Beans, tucked between two old office buildings. I only meant to buy a hot cup of coffee to warm up, but somehow ended up staying for hours, pretending to work on my laptop just to have an excuse to stay in a place with free Wi-Fi and a power outlet. That's when Emma, the barista, noticed me. A girl about my age, messy brown curls, wary eyes but not unkind. "Hey, if you're gonna camp out here with just one Americano, at least don't hog the whole big table," she said, wiping down the espresso machine that was hissing like it was about to explode. I sighed, closed my laptop, and was about to get up when the machine groaned loudly and sputtered out a jet of steaming dark brown liquid that splattered everywhere. "It's broken again," Emma hissed, giving the machine a light kick. I looked at her, then at the machine. An idea flashed through my mind like lightning in a storm. "I could try fixing it, if you give me another cup of coffee and somewhere to sleep tonight." She stared at me like I'd just declared I was an alien. "What? Who do you think you are, some kind of HVAC engineer or something?" "Close, energy engineer, just graduated from Berkeley." Emma went quiet. Then she crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. "All right, if you can get that monster back up and running in 20 minutes, I'll talk to the manager and see if there's room in the storage for you to sleep, but if you break it worse, I'm calling the cops." I gave a small smile and pulled out a screwdriver from my backpack. A tool I always carried out of habit, a hard one to shake for any engineer. 15 minutes later, the machine let out a psh and started pouring coffee smoothly, like it had never broken down. Emma's mouth dropped open. "You just saved the whole store." The manager, a Mexican man named Carlos, nodded after hearing the whole story, then led me to the storage room in the back. It was packed with coffee bags, paper cups, and industrial toilet paper rolls, but it was clean and dry. To me at that moment, it felt like a 5-star hotel. I started working part-time at Willow Beans. Fixing small things, cleaning machines, sometimes helping with orders during rush hour. During the day, I worked. At night, I crawled back into the storage room, opened my laptop, and kept redrawing the energy storage system design in my head. The idea I was pursuing was a molecular battery with an entirely new structure, allowing renewable energy to be stored with near-perfect efficiency. No leakage, no waste. No reliance on expensive lithium. A feasible solution for the future of sustainable energy. Emma often brought me leftover muffins at the end of the day, then sat down on the floor, sneaking peeks at my screen as I sketched molecular diagrams. "What's that?" she asked the first time. "The future," I replied, eyes still fixed on the screen. "If I can pull this off, the system could change the entire electricity industry worldwide." "Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie." She laughed. "But you do seem pretty serious." "I don't have a choice. They threw me out of the house because they thought I was a failure. Now I'm going to prove just how wrong they were." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Then you need to survive first. The future sounds expensive." I laughed. Her words were more accurate than anything I'd ever heard from a professor. I had $38 left in my wallet, but I had the design, I had my brain, I had a place to sleep, and for the first time in days, I had someone who believed I wasn't crazy. I didn't have anything in hand. But for me that was enough to begin. 3 months after I moved into the storage room at Willow Beans, I began to feel the fine line between exhaustion and obsession. During the day, I scrubbed machines, fixed leaky pipes, hauled heavy bags of coffee. At night, I buried myself in circuit diagrams, running simulations of the new molecular battery on my aging laptop. I had no lab, no research funding, and no one backing me. Except myself, and an idea no one else dared to try. One rainy morning, I fixed a receipt printer for a man named Ethan Rhodes, the owner of a startup specializing in energy measurement devices. When I helped him troubleshoot an electrical error in the control circuit, something in his eyes changed. It was no longer the look of a customer at a low-level employee, but the look of someone recognizing something unusual. "You're really an engineer?" Ethan asked, surprised and skeptical. "Graduated from Berkeley. Energy systems major," I replied, wiping my hands with a grease-stained rag. "And you're working here?" I gave a crooked smile. Not everyone was wrapped in velvet from birth. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, then handed me a business card. "I want you to meet someone. If what you're saying is true, she'll be interested." That person was Professor Linda Zhang, a molecular research specialist at Stanford University. A week later, I was sitting in her small office in the main research facility, palms soaked in sweat. "Tell me your idea," she said, sitting across from me, eyes cold as steel. I presented the molecular battery design based on a nanoporous structure, optimized for storing renewable energy without heat loss. Something current lithium-ion batteries have never been able to do. Professor Jean said nothing for almost 10 minutes. She carefully read through the technical description, scrutinizing every line of the equations I had handwritten in sharp, slanted strokes. "Theoretically it's impressive, Lily, but has anyone validated this model?" "No, because no one believes me." She looked at me, then suddenly gave a quiet laugh. "I know a place that could help you verify it, but I'm not holding your hand to get there, unless you're ready to work like a monster for the next 365 days. I looked her straight in the eye. "I've lived in a storage room, cleaned a coffee shop, taken on freelance engineering gigs every night. I'm willing to die for this project, if I have to." 3 days later, I received an email approving my use of the Advanced Materials Lab at UC Berkeley as an independent research collaborator. From that moment, the real grind officially began. I didn't quit the coffee shop job. I needed the money. Outside of my hours at Willow Beans, I fixed circuit boards for startups, designed power supply systems for measurement devices, even drew CAD models for senior year student projects. Any engineering work. I took it. I slept an average of 3 hours a day. In the mornings, I brewed coffee. Afternoons, I ran around small office buildings in the valley. At night, I dove into the Berkeley lab like a tech addict. I drank coffee like water, survived on cheap sandwiches, and held on to one thing: never let myself collapse. Every test was filled with failure. Every wrong measurement meant I had to grit my teeth and revise dozens of lines of code and design drafts. But I didn't stop. Not after coming this far. One October night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., I burst into tears in the lab. Not from pain, but because for the first time after hundreds of attempts, the results showed an energy storage efficiency of 98.7%. A number I had never seen in any scientific paper I'd read. I thought I was hallucinating. I triple-checked, then again, then printed the results and brought them to Professor Zhang's office at 5 a.m. She looked at the data, then raised her head, narrowing her eyes. "This isn't just a breakthrough, this is a revolution." I trembled, leaning against the wall, mind spinning between joy and exhaustion. "You think anyone would invest?" "If they don't, they're idiots," she replied coldly. "I'll arrange a few meetings for you, but remember, Lily, this is just the beginning." I looked at the design in my hands, still unable to believe it was real. It had started with a suitcase, $110, and a slap in the face from my own father. Now, I was standing on the edge of changing the global energy industry. And this was just the first step. I walked into my first pitch meeting with hands shaking from cold, or fear, maybe both. Across from me sat 3 investors, representing a well-known venture capital firm in San Mateo. I wore an old blazer borrowed from Emma, hair tied neatly, a touch of lipstick to avoid looking like a corpse after 6 months of lab-induced exhaustion. I laid out everything: the new battery structure, the data, the application potential, and even a commercialization strategy. The last thing I said was, "If you don't invest, someone else will." But you'll regret it. The three of them looked at each other, nodding slightly. One of them said, voice cold as ice. Very ambitious, but not enough experience. You're too young, too new, and this technology is still too far from reality. Sorry. I pressed my lips together and bowed my head. The first rejection. Many more to come. 2 weeks later, 3 more meetings. 2 rejections, 1, we'll consider it. I knew that meant never. I returned to the storage room after the last meeting, collapsed onto the thin mattress. Emma sat beside me, handed me a cup of coffee and said softly, "They can reject you as many times as they want, but you only need one person to believe in you." I nodded. That sentence kept me going for another week. Then one day, I received an email from Orion Capital, a rising venture firm specializing in clean tech investments. The sender signed, Alexa Morgan, Managing Partner. The meeting took place on the 12th floor of a glass building in downtown Palo Alto. I had prepared everything thoroughly: presentation deck, technical reports, financial models. But the first thing Alexa asked when I entered the room stopped me cold. "Why should I believe you? You've got nothing but a few papers, a diploma, and a dream." I looked her straight in the eye. "Because I gave up everything to pursue this. No parental support, no inheritance, no connections. I've been sleeping in a storage room, working 16 hours a day for a year straight. I have nothing to lose. But if you invest, I'll make the impossible happen, just like I did with that prototype." Alexa was silent. I thought I'd failed again. "If I invest, what would you name the company?" I blinked. Astrovault. Because it's a burst of light in the dark. Just like how I started from nothing. 3 days later, I got the call. $5 million, 25% equity. The deal was approved. I held the phone, standing silently in the empty parking lot behind the coffee shop. My eyes burned. Not because of the money, but because someone finally believed in me. Not because of my last name, not because of connections, but because of who I was. The first office of Astrovault was in a refurbished warehouse near Fremont. I hired 4 engineers. 3 from Berkeley, 1 from a young tech startup program. They were young, relentless, and just as wild as I was. We worked like mad, from fine-tuning the molecular structure to reduce energy loss, to designing heat-resistant casings, to developing smart conversion circuits. Every day was a challenge. Every technical error was a battle with our own limits. 6 months later, Astrovault Core 1's first commercial prototype was born. Smaller than a microwave, with an efficiency of 99.1%, far surpassing anything on the market. The test results were independently verified by the California Clean Energy Center. The day I received the official report, I hugged Emma and cried in the very coffee shop where it all began. "You did it," Emma whispered. "Now they'll have to listen." And they did. Energy companies started knocking, governments sent partnership offers, competitors started getting nervous. Within 3 months, we signed 2 contracts to supply energy storage systems to major solar power stations in Arizona and Nevada. The media called me the woman who broke the laws of physics. I didn't care. I only remembered one thing: my father's look of disdain the day he threw me out with just $110. I swore when I came back, I'd show him just how much a worthless person like me was truly worth. 3 years after Astrovault launched its first product, I stepped onto the stage of the New York Stock Exchange, a small gavel in hand, as the founding team cheered. Our stock, ASTV, doubled within the first 6 hours. By the end of the week, I wasn't just the founder, I was the majority shareholder, worth over $100 million. The name Lily Langston started appearing everywhere, on newspapers, media outlets, and at global tech conferences. But no one knew I had legally changed my name to Lily Beckett, leaving Langston behind as a way to sever the past. No one, except Emma, and a few of my closest people, knew the connection between me and one of Colorado's oldest investment empires. Langston Capital. The thing was, Langston Capital was on the brink of collapse. My father's blind arrogance, resistance to change, and outdated pride had left his empire crushed by the rise of fintech markets. Within a year, they lost nearly 40% of their managed assets, investors pulled out en masse, and they faced the looming threat of a takeover by younger, tech-savvy competitors. What my father didn't know was that the tech rival threatening him was my own company. I had founded Beacon Venture Holdings, a strategic investment arm under Astrovolt, specializing in acquiring struggling firms to restructure and integrate clean energy technologies into their ecosystems. Through 4 subsidiaries, 3 trust funds, and 2 independent entities, Beacon quietly acquired 43% of Langston Capital's shares in just 7 months. And then I decided to return home. Not to ask for forgiveness, but to buy back the place that once threw me away. That fall morning, I stepped out of a sleek black Tesla in front of the white limestone building that once symbolized the Langston family's power. It didn't look much different from the last time I saw it. Still the massive stone columns, the gilded letters, and the smug expressions of the sharply dressed receptionists. I walked into the main lobby, hair tied high, wearing a custom-tailored suit by a brand I had invested in. The receptionist looked up, eyes unfamiliar. "I'd like to meet with the board of directors, schedule it before 10 a.m. My name is Beckett, Lily Beckett." 10 minutes later I was escorted to the top floor, the one my father used to forbid me from setting foot on when I was still just a dreamy and useless girl. The mahogany doors opened to reveal a vast boardroom with a long table, leather chairs, and walls lined with portraits of past Langston chairmen. I recognized my grandfather's eyes in the highest-hung painting. The same eyes that used to send chills down my spine every time I passed by. One by one the board members shuffled in. Their faces were tense, uneasy. They all knew. Rumors about Beacon Holdings acquiring shares had spread since last week. But no one knew who was behind Beacon. And then, my father walked in. He looked noticeably older, more gray hair, and the fire once blazing in his eyes now dulled by exhaustion. He looked at me, but didn't recognize me. He couldn't. I stood up. "Hello, Mr. Henry Langston, we meet again." He squinted, frozen in place for a few seconds. Then slowly stepped toward me. "Lily?" I nodded and calmly sat down in the chair at the head of the table. "It's been a while, hasn't it? Since the day you threw me out of your house with $110 and the words, 'That's all you're worth.'" The room fell silent. A few board members began to stammer. Mr. Peterson, my father's longtime associate, dropped his pen upon hearing my name. "No way," someone whispered. I opened my leather briefcase, pulled out a report and handed it to the secretary. Beacon Holdings currently owns 43% of Langston Capital's shares and controls 61% of its corporate debt. With the board unable to meet its short-term loan obligations, we have the right to assume full operational control. My father stood still, trying to keep his voice calm. "You can't do this. This is a family company. It's blood, it's legacy." I tilted my head. "Legacy? Where were you when your only daughter was thrown out on the street, living in a coffee shop storage room and knocking on every lab door just to chase her dream? You think you have the right to talk about family?" He stepped closer, voice trembling. "Lily, I was wrong." I didn't answer. I just looked him straight in the eye. "I didn't come back today to hear apologies. I came back to reclaim what you once said, I could never build without the Langston name. Well, now you see, I did it. And more?" I stood, placing my hand on the wooden table where he used to yell at me throughout my childhood. "Welcome to the era where Lily Beckett runs the game." The air in the boardroom thickened, as if someone had locked all the doors and thrown away the keys. The once proud faces were now lowered toward the documents I had just distributed. On those pages was the truth they didn't want to face. I held 45% of Langston Capital's shares, and worse, I also controlled over 70% of the debt hanging over their heads. I stood, every word landing sharp and clear like a hammer striking steel. There are only 2 options. 1. Langston Capital merges into Beacon Holdings, becoming a subsidiary of Astrovolt. 2. I call the debt immediately and this company collapses within 72 hours. No one spoke. All eyes turned to my father. Henry Langston. The man who once claimed, I'd never amount to anything without the Langston name attached. He exhaled sharply, face pale, hands bracing against the edge of the table like he was trying to keep from collapsing. This is revenge, isn't it? He growled. You came back to destroy what your father built over decades? I laughed. Wrong. I came back to fix your mistakes. By tearing down the rotting legacy you've clung to like a drowning man hugging a punctured float. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice screeching like metal against glass. I'm the last Langston still in charge. I won't step down just because of a traitor daughter. No, I replied coldly. You'll step down because you let this corporation spiral toward bankruptcy, and I'm the only one holding out a hand to save it. I opened my laptop, projecting a detailed financial breakdown. Every loan, every due date, every SEC warning about liquidity risks he had chosen to ignore. Numbers don't lie. They're raw, cold, and have no room for ego. If you don't sign the transfer papers today, I said slowly, Beacon Holdings will exercise creditor rights and file for Langston Capital's bankruptcy. A soft scraping sound broke the silence. My father's chair slid back. He stood up, slowly, as if the weight of 30 years of delusion had just come crashing down on him. So you really did it? Without me? Without your mother? Without the Langston name? Oh. I didn't respond. I just looked him in the eye, for the first time without fear. He glanced around the room, then paused at the portrait of my grandfather hanging behind the chairman's chair. The same seat he occupied when he threw $110 in my face and called it all I was worth. Lily, he said softly, like a confession never meant to be spoken aloud. I held out the pen toward him. Sign it, or you can watch yourself drag your entire legacy to the grave. A brief hesitation. Then the sound of pen on paper. Slow, but firm. He signed. I took the document back, folded it carefully and slipped it into my leather bag, as if it weren't just a legal agreement, but living proof of a journey no one believed I could complete. A few board members stood up and began clapping, not out of joy, but because they knew they had just witnessed the end of a dynasty and the beginning of a new name. I walked to the chairman's seat, the chair that once symbolized power and pride in my family. I didn't sit. I just placed a hand on it, eyes locked on my father. You once said I was only worth $100, so now ask yourself, how much did you lose trying to stop me from becoming who I am? He turned his face away, said nothing, he didn't need to. I left that room without looking back, because for the first time in my life, I knew I no longer needed anyone's approval to prove my worth. The Langston building still stood, as a relic of decay. But I didn't return to live in the past. I came back to rebuild, from the wreckage my own family left behind. I took over Langston Capital not to burn it to the ground, but to uproot the rot my father left, and replant a healthier ecosystem from scratch. Within 6 months I fired the entire old executive board. People who lived off reputation and added no value beyond pointless meetings. But I kept almost all the middle and lower level staff, the ones who had quietly carried the workload, while the leaders counted money and shifted blame. I renamed the company Lunaris Impact Group and shifted the entire investment portfolio to renewable energy, clean tech, and sustainable development startups. The remnants of the old Langston were discarded without hesitation, not out of hatred, but because I knew, to build something new, you have to be willing to dismantle the old. The media called me the legacy breaker building the future. I didn't deny it. My mother, Evelyn Langston, called me no less than 10 times. She sent handwritten letters, emails, even her assistant to the office asking for a meeting. The letters were drenched in lavender-scented guilt, written in flowery language. I just want to understand you better. I didn't think it would go this far. We're still family after all. I replied only once, with a 3-line email. Some bridges are meant to burn. If you want peace, start by not trying to fix what you deliberately ignored. Lily Beckett. I was no longer her daughter. 1 year after the merger was finalized, I received a package. No sender's name, but the handwriting struck me like a knock from the past. Inside was a small envelope. I opened it and found a single $100 bill, laminated, pristine to the point of lifelessness. Along with it was a note, handwritten with a shaky hand. You are worth more than I ever thought. H. I held the bill in my hands for a long time, then folded it. No tears. No smile. Just a strange emptiness, like I had finally received the validation I no longer needed. That evening I flew back to Palo Alto. Emma was still at Astrovault, now the chief operating officer, managing over 600 employees across 3 countries. But we still kept our old ritual. Once a month we returned to Willow Beans, the coffee shop where it all began. It was no longer the quiet place it used to be. Now it was busy, freshly painted, and had a small sign hanging behind the counter. The birthplace of a new energy ecosystem. I handed the $100 bill to the new shop owner, a young student with eyes full of ambition, and said, "Put it toward a scholarship fund for the part-time staff here. Maybe someone will need a launch pad, like I once did." He looked at the bill, surprised. "Is this real money?" I nodded, smiling softly. "Very real. And maybe worth more than any other $100 bill in the world." He folded the bill carefully, eyes glowing. I turned to look at Emma. The one who had witnessed every stumble, every sleepless night, every moment I nearly collapsed, and gave her a gentle nod. "At the end of the day," I said, holding my warm cup of coffee, "I didn't need revenge. I just needed to prove that I built something they once thought I never could." Emma nodded, speaking softly. "And what you built, no one can ever take away. I don't know where I'll go next. Maybe the next product. Maybe a venture fund supporting young female founders. Or maybe just a few years of peace, after a decade of non-stop running. But I know one thing for sure. A person's true worth doesn't lie in where they were born. It doesn't lie in their last name, inheritance, or the validation of others. It lies in what they dare to build from nothing, and what they refuse to let go of, even when the world once looked down on them. I'm no longer Lily Langston. I'm Lily Beckett. And I created my own worth, from the ashes they left behind. Lily Beckett's story is a powerful reminder that where you come from does not determine your value. Dismissed, abandoned, and stripped of all privilege, she built an empire from nothing. Not through bitter revenge, but through intellect, perseverance, and belief in herself, Lily turned rejection into a driving force for success. In real life, this reminds us, no one has the right to define you, except you, and true worth lies in what you dare to build and relentlessly protect. What do you think about Lily's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel to keep discovering heartfelt stories and meaningful lessons from family and life.